Okay, so thanks for being here on a Monday night, week 2, good times. Let's see, we're up to 13. So just thinking about how to proceed. A little bit of information from you all would be nice. I've got my participants list open. Using the reactions feature, how many of you are in biological sciences? Ag stuff, give me a thumbs up or a hand. Biological or ag, okay, 3. How about engineering? Any engineers? Oh, there's 1, 2, okay, cool. Other STEM maths. How about maths? Any of the math sciences? Stats? Okay. Other STEM I didn't include, chemistry, those kinds of things? Nice. Social sciences, education, linguistics, business econ. Okay, humanities? Yeah. Okay, cool. This will be fun. So let me share my screen really quick so we can get into it. Like East mentioned, so my name is Kendon Kurzer. I finished my PhD a few years back, like a few years back now. And I'm all kinds of weird degrees, but I'm ultimately interested in supporting multilingual students, in particular with writing expectations beyond first-year composition. I'm currently the Associate Director of Undergraduate Writing across the curriculum in the University Writing Program. And so I do a lot of outreach to help promote effective writing approaches as a way of improving learning in discipline-specific writing classes. My background being primarily a social scientist as opposed to, say, a humanities person. I'm not a literacy, like a literature person, right? Like many people might think of when it comes to comp. And so I'm more STEM focused with a lot of the kinds of writing and things that I do myself. And so it's really interesting and helpful for me to get involved with the undergraduate research conference. So thanks for inviting me here. So the stuff that I've prepared today has been adapted by some other colleagues, Doctors Melissa Bender and Lisa Sperber, who are both continuing lecturers in the university writing program too. And so thanks to them for sharing their materials. Switch, go. So what is an abstract? An abstract is a summary of a research study or something that is original. It doesn't have to be a formal research study, but there's something that's new, something that's unique. And it's this summary that highlights the major points of whatever it is that you're planning on presenting or writing about, while concisely describing the scope. And so what we ask people to do in abstracts is produce typically about 150 to 200 words of this summary. It's really, really hard to do particularly well. And if you read a lot of abstracts, you realize that many of them are not written particularly well out there, but we've got some tips that will help you write more effective ones, mainly targeting for the Undergraduate Research Conference. Now, linguistic features and kind of organization, content, things that are expected vary according to the field and the purpose. And so we'll get into that a little bit. Maybe if I can actually get some response here, what do you think the purpose of an abstract is? So we talked about them being a brief summary, but why? What is the purpose of an abstract? Who reads them? How are they used? What do you think? Just chime in because I can't really see you anyway.
So in the chat, we have everybody reads them, a quick preview to give an overview of your research.
So everybody, who is everybody? Let's break that down a little bit more. Is it really everybody? Like everybody? Your grandmother is just out there reading abstracts on EBSCO?
I think it's a way for academics to kind of sift through many different articles of many different fields to sort of narrow down which ones they want to look at or which ones are relatable to their research. So they get to the point really quick where it talks about the intro, it talks about the conclusion, and anything in between that seems relevant. So it kind of quickens that process.
Okay, great. So who reads them? Other academics, right? Yes, very few other people are actually reading these for kicks and giggles. And the purpose, you kind of alluded to that, thank you. The point is to get people to read it, right? And so to read the full thing or go to your conference presentation or whatever it may be. It's about framing your study or framing whatever it is you're planning on presenting in such a way that's going to make it appealing to the target audience, which would be other academics who are interested in the project, other academics who want to use your work as a foundation for their work, something like that. Questions so far?
I see none in the chat at this point. And again, feel free to drop them in, folks, if you have questions.
Yep, please do, please do. So how about this? Is an abstract an introduction? Does it introduce your project or does it serve something slightly different, a different purpose? What do you think? Introduction, just basically a different way of an introduction, or is it a little bit different? Nothing.
So we've got some stuff in the chat. So
Okay.
it says, no, it's a summary. It's more, another person said it's more comprehensive than an intro. Someone else said it takes key points from every section.
Okay. Key points from every section. I like that. That's a good way to think about it. So you're right. It's not just an introduction. Although I think a lot of students, I teach research papers, right? And I have students write abstracts. And one of the comments that I make the most, like almost 90% of the time, is that your abstract really is not an introduction. I think a lot of students start writing the abstract first because it's at the beginning of the paper and that's where we start. But really, you can't write an effective abstract until after you've done everything else, because it's pieces from all of these different sections. And honestly, I think a stronger abstract is one that doesn't have any kind of introductory stuff. It's mostly about, here's my original contribution. And so as you're writing this, keep in mind it's this original contribution thing that's key. And so just let that frame the rest of our discussion. And so you're right, they are summaries, they are mini texts, they are screening devices for readers and conference attendees so they know if they're interested in going to your particular presentation or reading your actual paper. It's a preview for the readers so the readers know what to expect. And then it's also used for indexing help for editors online or online databases. And so even in our undergraduate research conference, there's the whole proposal, the whole conference proceedings, right? People will use these abstracts to inform which presentations they're most interested in attending. Questions so far?
None so far.
Okay. So for the undergraduate research conference, 150 to 200 word limit. It's a hard limit, as in don't go any further than 200 because it won't accept it. Aim for a lay audience, an educated, right? We're at UC Davis. People who will be reading it are educated, but not necessarily informed on your particular topic. And so keep in mind that you want an audience who is intelligent, who can understand complicated things, but may not be an engineer or may not be a statistician, to be able to read and comprehend and understand what it is that you're planning on talking about. And we'll get into how to do that a little bit more. Promissory or preliminary abstracts are acceptable. It's just fine. And even at other like global, national, or international conferences, it's not uncommon to present work in progress at these conferences. And so something that you're just starting out on is totally valid to write about for something like this, and even in other conferences as well. Only one abstract submission per person. And then this is true in the past, but I don't know, I didn't see it in the website this year. No citations allowed, correct, E?
That is correct. No citations allowed. And actually, we have made a change to the only one abstract submission per person. In previous years, we've had that because we have a physical space limitation. We can only fit so many folks in Wellman or in the ARC. But
Right.
since we're virtual this year, we don't have that same space capacity. So students are welcome to submit more than one abstract this year. Once we go back to in-person, it'll be back to just one abstract per person.
So take advantage of it now. Cool, cool. But so while other abstracts, you may see citations, the occasional like 1 or 2 citations in abstracts that are published. For this one, you don't need them. You don't need them. So just so you know. Personally, I don't necessarily make my students completely remove all of their abstracts when they're writing abstracts for my classes. But you want to keep it to the bare minimum because, and we'll get into this more later, but if you've got a lot of citations in the abstract, that means you're probably including too much background and it's operating like an introduction, not an actual summary with the abstract. Some tips to keep in mind here, you want to make sure that you're working with your professor while drafting the abstract itself. Connecting to a general audience, avoid technical jargon, right? Keep it relatively straightforward. And when you do include jargon or acronyms, provide a definition or a full term. So like ultra low sulfur diesel, ULSD, should be in parentheses after it, not before it. Frequently students will include the acronym and then in parentheses, the definition, and it should be flipped the first time, and then each additional time that you refer to it, you can use the acronym just fine. Can't stress this enough. The 200 word count is a hard one. Make sure you cut excess words. Every word in an abstract is crucial. There are some tips. We don't have time to get into it right now, but if you Google the paramedic method, Purdue's online writing lab, the OWL, has some good resources there. Paramedic method, that's what I encourage my students to use. And there's some more tips at the website there that you can find pretty easily. Question so far, we good? So the content itself, you really want to target these 5 different kinds of categories. Brief background, introduction, research, context. And by brief, I mean like literally 1 sentence, no more. Maybe 2, but really 1, okay? What do we currently know about the topic? Why is the topic important? It's that kind of foundational background that you want to include, but again, not at the expense of everything that's coming later. And so we'll look at some examples later, and it's really, really tempting when you're writing these, for me as well, when I'm writing my own abstracts for my research papers, to include more background because the audience needs it. Yeah, the audience will need it when they're reading the actual paper. So save it for the actual paper. And so brief background, emphasis on brief. 1 sentence, ideally like half a sentence, where you can do a clause that is this background, and then you're moving into number 2, the present research, the purpose of what your actual study is. So what is this study about? Then brief methods or materials, subjects, procedures, just again, fairly brief, just here's what I did, how was the study done? Before you move into the most important parts would be the results and findings and the discussion, conclusion, implications, or recommendations. So we want to know what you did, but that's not the part of this that's really going to capture the audience's attention. It's more effective and get them to want to read or engage with the rest of it. And so it's more effective to lead with the so what. Why does this matter? What does this actually mean? And so focusing on what you found and why what you found matters tends to be more effective. And so the bulk of what you do in your abstract should be more about these last points down here. This stuff is just kind of basic stuff to help the audience feel that you are valid, that you're a reliable resource. This is where the meat is. Comments, questions about that?
Yeah, we have a question about how does the structure of a promissory abstract differ from that of a finished study?
Honestly, not really at all, except I would, so the verbs that you use in this study I am conducting now, as opposed, or in this preliminary study, and things like preliminary results, right? I suspect we will find this, and this is why what it still matters. And so it's a little bit more speculative, but the organization is pretty much the same. You're just changing the verb tenses around. Good question. Does that answer that?
So yes, it does. Thank you.
Other questions?
Not right now.
Okay. So a different way to think about this. You want to say what you did, why you did it, how you did it, what you've learned, and what it means. And again, the bulk of it, like I would plan on about half of it being what you learned and why it matters. That's kind of a good way to think of it. So the first 3 points there should be relatively quick, relatively quite concise. The whole thing needs to be concise, but really moving into that, what did you actually learn? What did you find? And then what does it mean? So just to give you an idea, this doesn't actually have any real content to it, but these are the kinds of phrases that we get at to grasp those different things. So background, we've got a knowledge gap about something, right? There's this topic and we need more research. In order to fill this research, I'm doing this experiment. Currently, and notice this one, so this is a promissory one. This is one that's currently being done. And so right now I'm at this particular phase and this is what I'm actually looking at. And thus far, my initial findings suggest that X, Y, and Z, and these are meaningful because. Yeah. So some things to keep in mind as we're adjusting this kind of general framework to our specific contexts. What types of background do general readers and other researchers need? So what needs to go in that one sentence? What is the crucial part for me to include? Which verb tenses are used? Are the verbs descriptive? And are we actually moving away? This is more of a wordiness issue, but things like be verbs, is, am, are, was, were, those don't convey a whole lot of actual meaning. Including more concrete descriptive verbs tends to be much more concise and clear and help the reader understand what it is that you're actually doing. If allowed, not true in this, right? But in other contexts, are there citations or references to previous research? You can still kind of refer to general background in your field without citing it. You just don't want to necessarily use background that is overly like in this particular study because you can't cite it. Does the abstract use I or we? It's typically not a problem in most fields to include I or we at this point, especially in an abstract where you're saying, this is what I did. Some fields are a little bit more reticent to use I or we. Some of the STEM fields are a little bit more cagey about it, although it's moving away. We're using it a whole lot more, even in most STEM fields. Medical field's a little bit of a holdout, but even there, it's happening more. Social sciences, I or we is totally fine. Humanities, it's totally fine. And again, most STEM fields, it's pretty fine as well now too. And so I would recommend that you use it. It's changing now. It's going to happen. It's going to be more common to use I or we in academic contexts. So feel free to use it more now, I think. Acronyms or abbreviations, are you using them and defining them appropriately? And so some things to keep in mind. Some strategies to deal with the opener. That's one of the main things. Like, how do I actually provide some background in such a concise way that's still getting the audience's attention? And so there's one strategy where you're starting with a real world phenomenon or with standard practice, something that is already known. And here are a couple of just quick, you can see corporate taxation rates vary around the world. Just a short sentence that's framing, here's everything else that we're going to be talking about. Economists have long been interested in the relationship between corporate taxation and corporate strategy. Notice that these are pretty general, right? You don't need a citation for something like this, even though it might not be like common knowledge for you talk to somebody random on the street. But in academic contexts, and especially at the kinds, typically when you're writing abstracts, the audience would be other economists for something like this. And so they would recognize this without pointing to a single study. Stop me if there are questions, okay?
I will do, we're good now.
Strategy. Okay, cool. Strategy B, starting with a purpose or the objective. So this is where we are even kind of cutting out that background and we're kind of building it into this purpose, this statement of purpose. The aim of this study is to examine the effects of the recent change in corporate taxation, right? Really, like, we've captured this right here. This would be the background, but it's framing it in such a way that this is the study that we're doing. And so that way we're really not wasting time on background and we're building it into our actual purpose for doing the study. Another strategy, starting with the present researcher action, we analyze corporate taxation returns before and after the introduction of the new tax rule. So again, you can see that we're kind of building in the background and actually focusing on what we were doing with the research. Another approach, starting with a problem or an uncertainty, the relationship between corporate taxation and corporate strategy remains unclear. So here it's a little bit more background-y, right? It's not so focused on me as a researcher or my study, but it's still pretty concise and it's really framing the topic quite nicely and concisely. Questions about any of these strategies?
None in the chat, but if you have some and you want to unmute yourself, feel free to do so now.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there one strategy preferred over others?
I mean, not without, no. Different disciplines may expect is too strong a word. Certain strategies may be more effective in certain disciplines or more common, but I don't think there's any super firm, like you can see how these 4 strategies all use the same topic and it seems completely effective. And so I think some of the fields that are a little bit more rigid when it comes to the way you structure abstracts actually will require different sections in an abstract. And so I teach writing for nursing students, and medical abstracts frequently have like background and then you have one sentence and there's literally like little sections in there. And so obviously if you're writing for a journal like that, where it would be background, methods, findings, discussion, you would obviously need to adhere to that. But most other disciplines and even medical, it's not all journals do that. And so no, I think I would probably recommend, let's see. No, I mean, I think all of them can be effective. I think all of them can be effective as long as if you're choosing strategy A or strategy D, where you really are just starting with background, just make sure that you keep it concise. One of the things that I like about strategy B and C is that it kind of forces you to move more quickly into your actual study. And so that's nice. Good question. Other questions?
Not right now, thank you.
So summary there. Remember, what did you do? Why did you do it? How did you do it? What have you learned? And what does it mean? So now let's look at a few examples. Can you copy and paste that handout link in there again, just so people can see it for me, E? So I've got this handout. It should be, it's viewable. I think you probably should be able to copy and paste. I've got some examples. I've got 4 examples of abstracts from different disciplines. And what I'd like you to do is basically choose one of these. The one, I would recommend the one that's most closely related to kind of your discipline, and identify these different sections in there, okay? What I would do is actually highlight it in different colors. So what's background? And I've got on the let me open it up. That would be easier. still see this okay, right?
Yes.
So yeah, so I've highlighted in mine that I'll show you after I give you a chance to work through it. The background in blue, the present research or purpose in red, the methods, materials, blah, blah, blah in yellow, results and findings in green, and discussion, conclusion, implications in purple. And so in these, go ahead and look through and determine what parts are which color, which sections. And then we can look at these examples and I can show you what I found. And then we can talk about what makes them good or less effective. Are you able to copy and paste this out? Okay, do you know? Okay.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, cool. So then, yeah, choose one. Let's take maybe 3 minutes to give you a chance to do that. Stop share so I can see you better. How are we doing? Give me a thumbs up when you're through yours. Okay, we'll go with a couple more minutes. I'm only seeing one so far. Three. Four. Five. Let's go. We'll wait until we get to about 7 or 8 of you. 6. How we doing? Okay, let's go ahead. So hopefully you've got some of it. Feel okay. Share screen. Okay. You can still see, yes? We're good?
Yes. Yes, we're good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so in the first one, multimedia risk assessment of biodiesel, tier 2 ant farm project. Fun, right? This is what I said. So I identified this first sentence as being background, and then it moves pretty quickly into this combination of experiments. And then there's a decent amount of summary of the methods before moving into these initial findings. And so you can see that here again, this is something that's in progress. And so they frame it pretty clearly as such simply by saying initial findings. And so notice that that's there. And I am investigating, right? It's current. It's not something that's already been done. But it still feels professional, right? It doesn't feel like the author is presenting research that just hasn't been done and it's just not complete. It still seems legit. And so word choice and just capturing all of that, I think is important. And then here we've got kind of the application, the so what, why this matters here at the end. And so this is a pretty good balance. It might be a tad bit methods heavy, but they're doing some stuff that's technical enough that it needs some actual description. And so I think it's a pretty solid abstract. Questions on that one?
None in the chat.
Cool. So next we've got a very different one, right, on art history, Monet's Water Lily Defense. And this is what I identified it. So it's primarily background. Now, some of this is going to be disciplinary. When you're presenting a study, like you're actually collecting primary data yourself, you really need to move in quickly into that. When what you're doing is not so much presenting original data, but presenting a new theory or a new spin on something that's already been done, it's going to inherently result in something more like this. And so disciplinary wise, this is solid for art history. I would probably still, like if a student wrote this for one of my classes, I would still be like, this is too much background and you don't focus enough on the meat of it. Like if I'm an art historian, I would know all of this, right? This wouldn't really do that much to make me want to come to your presentation or to read your ultimate paper. And so really getting into these things here is far more likely to make me think that, oh, this person has something more meaningful, something more original, something that's going to make me sit up and pay attention. And so this one I would definitely tighten up the background to develop the content more here. Questions about that one?
Actually, I have a question on this one,
Sure.
Kendon. So for a discipline-specific conference, this may be a little bit background heavy. If this student were to submit this for the URC conference, would this background be appropriate?
So I mean, I think keeping the scope of what you're doing. So let me put it this way. If a student were to submit this to the Undergraduate Research Conference, I would suspect that they would be accepted just fine. Is it ideal and would it really make, so remember one of the challenging things about abstracts is that they really serve two purposes. One, to get accepted to a conference, and two, to make people come to your presentation. I think it would do fine. It would do really well at that first one. You'll likely be accepted to the conference because you know what you're talking about. And that's great. That's what we want to see at the undergraduate level. would an abstract like this do a fantastic job at actually pulling people in to attend their presentation? There's where I think it's a little bit weaker. No shade intended for Sarah Beats.
Thank you, Kevin.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Thank you.
And again, writing, like, abstracts are kind of impossible to write. Like, we're really asking you to do the impossible.
Mhm.
And so it's tough to do. It's tough to do. Okay, on to the next one, looking at BPA. This is what I said, fairly background heavy still, especially since BPA is going to be, it's a relatively known, right, material at this point. And so I would tighten up this a little bit more. The rest of it is the proportions are decent, but you notice how limited kind of application we see here at the end. And so it would be really nice to get more. This is what we think we'll find. Notice that this one is using terms like it's not even a study in progress right now. We will be doing it. That's fine. That's fine. But here in particular, you do still want to say, this is why it matters. This is why it matters, because that is going to bring in that audience later on, serving that second goal. And so and that's one of the challenging things about writing a promissory abstract, is that it's really tempting to fall into the trap of too much background, because that's what you know, that's what you have right now. And so even there, you want to tighten that up and really develop these anticipated results more later. Questions or comments there? Okay.
Not seeing any.
Last, but certainly not least, this one. So this is what I said. This is how I broke it up. And I think this is a really nicely balanced one, with the possible exception of a little bit too much methods, actually. And basically what I would just recommend is just tightening up this kind of demographic portion. It would be easy to just make that more concise and built into this previous sentence, which would again allow for a little bit more development here. And so that's what I would recommend with this one. But again, it's not background heavy. This would be a very solid abstract to see at something like this. Questions about this one? Okay, so I've got the URL again. I'm happy we've got a little bit of time. Where do we stand with abstracts for you? Do we want to look at an abstract or two of yours? If anybody has one and is brave and is okay, either, so we could do this a couple of different ways. Ideally, we'd look at one kind of together while it's being recorded, if somebody's okay with being vulnerable like that. If you don't have an abstract ready or prepared, then we can basically workshop what you have, and I might recommend that we turn off the recording at that stage. Thoughts on what we'd like to do? Anybody feel ready to have their abstract workshopped?
I actually recently submitted an abstract that I'm happy to put through the gauntlet if no one else has an abstract.
Any of you all want to look at one before we look at ease?
All right, I will stop the recording here. Give me 1 second.